In 1953, a film was released that would outlive the fears it was made to express. It arrived in theaters during a summer when the sky itself seemed dangerous, when every contrail could be mistaken for something worse, when children practiced hiding under desks and adults built shelters in their backyards, stocking them with canned goods and prayers. The world was learning to live with the atom, learning to sleep beneath mushroom clouds that existed only in potential, in the terrible mathematics of fission that hung over every city like an invisible storm. Into this atmosphere of dread and wonder, Paramount Pictures released a film about invasion from above, about cities turned to ash, about humanity's smallness against the infinite dark. The film was called The War of the Worlds, and it would flicker across screens for decades to come, its images burning into the collective unconscious with a permanence that transcended entertainment, becoming something closer to prophecy, though no one would recognize it as such until the winter of 2025, when telescopes in Hawaii detected something moving through the solar system that did not belong there, something that seemed to echo the very visions that had haunted audiences 72 years earlier. The projectionist would have loaded the reels with careful hands, threading celluloid through sprockets and gates, checking focus and aperture, ensuring that the light would pass through the film at exactly the right angle to cast its story onto the silver screen. There is something sacred about projection, about the way photons travel through transparent frames to resurrect images from their chemical sleep, how movement is conjured from stillness, through nothing more than the persistence of vision and the steady turning of a wheel. The theater would have filled slowly, families settling into seats, upholstered in burgundy velvet, the air thick with cigarette smoke and anticipation, the rustle of programs and whispered conversations forming a gentle susurrus beneath the organ music that preceded the main feature. They came to be frightened, to experience the catharsis of controlled terror, to watch the world end in technicolor and then walk out into the California evening, reassured by the solidity of the sidewalk beneath their feet, the familiar constellations overhead unchanged and indifferent. But before the invasion began, before the Martian war machines descended upon the small California town of Linda Rosa, before the world discovered that salvation would come not from weapons or wisdom, but from the smallest organisms invisible to the naked eye, the audience was treated to a prologue. Sir Cedric Hardwicke's voice, measured and grave, filled the auditorium with its British authority, narrating what the titles called the history of the Brotherhood War, though this name would be lost to most viewers, who would remember only the images, planets spinning in their orbits, worlds illustrated with the simplified beauty of mid-century scientific optimism, each one examined and dismissed as the Martian intelligence surveyed the solar system for a suitable conquest. Mercury, too close to the Sun. Venus, too hot. Jupiter, too cold. Saturn, beyond consideration. And then Earth, third from the Sun, blue and green and perfect, ripe for the taking. The camera moved through space with the stately pace of a documentary, giving audiences their first cinematic tour of the solar system, showing them worlds they had never seen except in textbooks and imagination. It was 1953, and humanity had not yet launched a single satellite, had not yet touched space with anything more than captured German rockets fired briefly into the upper atmosphere before falling back to the desert floor. The space age existed only in the future, waiting to be born 4 years hence when Sputnik would beep its way across the sky and change everything. But here, in this film, space was already familiar, already navigable, already a theater for human drama and cosmic conflict. Director Byron Haskin and producer George Pal had taken H.G. Wells' 1898 novel and transformed it into something that belonged entirely to their own moment in history. Wells had written his invasion as a British tale. Martians landing in the suburbs of London, attacking with tripod machines that stalked across the countryside like mechanical herons, their heat rays reducing Victorian civilization to char and memory. The novel was a critique of imperialism, of British colonialism's casual cruelty, turning the colonizers into the colonized, letting them feel the terror of superior technology wielded without mercy. But Haskin and Powell's 1953 version relocated the invasion to Southern California, replacing the tripods with graceful manta-ray-shaped craft that floated on invisible force fields. Glowing with an eerie, cobra-like eye, their heat rays rendered in brilliant animation that turned buildings to dust and people to shadows. This was not a film about empire. It was a film about the atomic age, about annihilation from above, about how quickly civilization could be erased by forces beyond comprehension or control. The Martian machines in the film look less like weapons and more like flying saucers, tapping into the UFO panic that had gripped America since Kenneth Arnold's 1947 sighting over Mount Rainier. Since the Roswell incident that same summer, since hundreds of witnesses had begun reporting disks and lights in the sky, objects that moved with impossible speed and purpose. The film married these anxieties perfectly. Aliens and atomic weapons, invasion from space, and destruction from splitting atoms, all blended into a technicolor nightmare that felt simultaneously fantastic and terrifyingly plausible. The special effects, created by a team led by Gordon Jennings, won the film its only Academy Award, and they remain striking even now, decades after computer-generated imagery replaced physical models and painted glass. The Martian craft were puppets, suspended on wires so fine they became invisible on film, moved with balletic grace by skilled operators who understood that alien technology should seem weightless, effortless, as if physics itself had been rewritten. The heat rays were animated frame by frame, each blast of destructive light painted onto the celluloid, creating an effect that looked both artificial and strangely authentic. The way children's drawings sometimes capture emotional truth better than photorealistic rendering. When the machines destroyed a church, when they reduced a farmhouse to rubble, when they swept across Los Angeles, turning the city into a sea of flame, audiences sat in darkness watching light destroy light, watching projected images of projection, watching a movie about the end of movies, the end of theaters, the end of sitting together in the dark pretending to be safe. The film knew what it was doing. It understood the metaphor it was creating. It was telling its audience that the worst thing imaginable was already possible, that the weapons existed to end the world, that the only question was when and how and whether anything would survive. But the film also offered hope, though of a strange and unsettling kind. In the final act, as humanity's weapons fail, as atomic bombs prove useless against the Martian force fields, as the invasion seems unstoppable and inevitable, the machines begin to falter. They crash, they fail, they fall silent and still, their cobra eyes dimming to black. Scientists and soldiers gather around the hulls, confused, searching for an explanation, and they discover that the Martians inside have died, killed not by human action, but by Earth's bacteria, by microorganisms to which humans had developed immunity over millions of years of coevolution, but to which the Martians had no defense. Life itself, the film suggested, was Earth's true protection, not missiles or bombs, but the invisible ecosystem of microbes that lived in every breath, on every surface, inside every body. This ending came directly from Wells's novel, where it served as a humbling reminder of humanity's place in nature, a suggestion that salvation comes not from technology or intelligence, but from the blind workings of biology, from processes that preceded consciousness and would outlast it. The 1953 film retained this ending but amplified its religious overtones, adding scenes of people praying in churches, of scientists acknowledging divine providence, of Sir Cedric Hardwicke's narration, explicitly thanking God for the invisible defenders that saved humanity from extinction. This was Cold War theology, the idea that America was protected by providence, that faith and science could coexist, that the same forces that created life could be trusted to preserve it against any threat. The film premiered at the Paramount Theater in Hollywood on February 13, 1953, and it opened to wide release in August of that same year, timing its arrival for the summer movie season, when families sought air-conditioned escape from the heat, and teenagers sought dark theaters for romance and rebellion. Critics praised the special effects while finding the story somewhat thin, the characters somewhat flat, the romance between Dr. Clayton Forrester and Sylvia Van Buren somewhat perfunctory, but audiences did not care about narrative sophistication. They came for spectacle and received it in abundance. They came to see the world destroyed and then saved, and they left satisfied, their quarters and dimes well spent. The film became one of the year's box office successes, earning back its budget several times over, playing in theaters for months, and then returning periodically for years, becoming a staple of television broadcasts and revival screenings, living on through endless repetition until the images became part of the shared vocabulary of disaster, referenced and parodied and remembered long after most of the audience had forgotten the names of the actors or the details of the plot. What remained was the feeling, the atmosphere, the sense that the sky could open at any moment and release something terrible and beautiful, something that would test humanity's worthiness to continue existing. The year 1953 occupies a peculiar position in history, balanced between the end of one world and the beginning of another. The Second World War had ended only 8 years earlier, close enough that everyone remembered it, that most adults had lived through it, that the habits of rationing and sacrifice and collective purpose had not yet fully faded, but the victory had been poisoned by what came after, by the descent of the Iron Curtain, by the Berlin blockade, by the Soviet detonation of their first atomic bomb in 1949, which ended America's nuclear monopoly and began the arms race that would define the next 4 decades. By 1953, both superpowers had tested hydrogen bombs, weapons that made the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki seem almost quaint by comparison, weapons that could erase entire cities in single blasts, weapons that existed in sufficient numbers to end civilization multiple times over. The Korean War had begun in 1950 and would drag on until an armistice was signed in July of 1953, just weeks before the War of the Worlds opened in wide release. And the conflict had demonstrated that the Cold War could turn hot, that proxy battles could erupt anywhere, that the threat of global annihilation existed not in some distant future, but as an immediate possibility hovering over every diplomatic crisis. Americans watched newsreels showing mushroom clouds blooming over Pacific atolls and Nevada deserts, watched test houses vaporized in milliseconds, watched mannequin families turn to charcoal. And they understood that their cities could disappear just as easily, just as suddenly, just as completely. Television was beginning its conquest of American living rooms, the new medium spreading rapidly, changing how people received information and entertainment, creating a more immediate and intimate relationship with images than cinema could provide. But television in 1953 was still primitive, still black and white, still limited to a few channels broadcasting a few hours a day, and it had not yet replaced movies as the primary form of visual storytelling. People still dressed up to go to the theater, still treated cinema as an event, still experienced movies collectively rather than individually. The theater was a public space, a democratic space, where strangers sat together in darkness and shared emotions, shared fear and laughter and awe, shared the experience of watching light move on a screen and believing for a few hours that the light was real, that the story was happening, that the danger was imminent. This communal experience gave films like The War of the Worlds a power that later home video releases could never quite recapture, because the fear was not just on screen but in the theater itself, in the breathing of the audience around you, in the collective tension that built as the Martian machines advanced and the human defenses crumbled, in the shared relief, when the machines fell silent and the microbes won their invisible war. Science in 1953 was experiencing a renaissance of public optimism. The structure of DNA would be discovered that same year by Watson and Crick, though the announcement would not come until April, after The War of the Worlds had already premiered. The first successful open-heart surgery using a heart-lung machine was performed in May. Jonas Salk was developing the polio vaccine that would be announced the following year, promising to end a disease that had terrorized parents for decades, that had paralyzed children and killed thousands, including President Franklin Roosevelt, whose disability had been hidden from the public but was common knowledge within political circles. Science was solving problems, curing diseases, extending life, making the world safer and more comprehensible. But science had also created the bomb, had given humanity the power to destroy itself. And this contradiction hung over everything. This sense that knowledge was simultaneously salvation and damnation. That every discovery contained the potential for both creation and annihilation. The War of the Worlds captured this ambivalence perfectly, showing scientists as heroes who worked tirelessly to understand the Martian threat, who tested their technology against the invaders, who sought rational solutions to an irrational situation, but also showing the limits of scientific power, showing that some problems could not be solved by intelligence or innovation, that sometimes survival came down to accident, to biology, to forces that existed before science and would exist after it. H.G. Wells himself had died in 1946, 7 years before the film adaptation of his most famous novel reached screens, and one wonders what he would have made of it, whether he would have appreciated the update or mourned the loss of his Victorian sensibility, whether he would have recognized his themes beneath the Cold War aesthetics and California setting. Wells had been a prophet of his own age, writing speculative fiction that anticipated technologies and social changes, imagining time machines and invisible men and islands of vivisected animals, using science fiction as a lens to examine contemporary anxieties and possibilities. His Martian invasion was a warning about colonialism and complacency, about what happens when a more advanced civilization encounters a less developed one, about how technology without morality becomes mere brutality. The 1953 film retained some of this but shifted the emphasis, making the invasion less about imperialism and more about existential threat, less about human cruelty reflected back and more about cosmic indifference, the universe's casual violence, the possibility that intelligence elsewhere might be fundamentally hostile, that the cosmos might contain predators for whom humanity was prey. This shift reflected the change in historical moment, the move from a world worried about empires to a world worried about annihilation, from anxiety about what humans might do to each other to anxiety about what existence itself might do to humanity. The film's visual language drew heavily from atomic test footage, from the images that had become ubiquitous in newsreels and magazines. Images of fireballs expanding across the sky, of shockwaves rippling through clouds, of landscapes transformed instantly from habitation to desolation. When the Martian heat rays struck, they produced blooms of light and destruction that looked remarkably similar to nuclear detonations. The same sudden brightness followed by expanding devastation, the same sense of physics unleashed beyond human scale. This was not accidental. The filmmakers understood exactly what they were doing. They were translating atomic anxiety into alien invasion, giving audiences a way to process their fear of nuclear war by displacing it onto fictional Martians, allowing them to experience the horror of atomic destruction while maintaining the psychic distance that fiction provides. The film let people watch their cities burn without having to imagine American bombs or Soviet bombs. They could blame Martians instead, could externalize the threat, could believe that the danger came from outside rather than from within, from human choices and human weapons. This displacement was therapeutic in its way, offering catharsis through metaphor, letting people experience and survive their worst fears in the safe space of the theater. And now, more than 7 decades later, the film continues to exist, continues to be watched, continues to flicker across screens, both large and small, preserved on multiple formats, restored and remastered, studied by scholars, and enjoyed by audiences who were not born when it premiered, who live in a world that Wells and Haskin could barely have imagined. The Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union dissolved, and the threat of nuclear annihilation receded from immediate consciousness, moving from nightmare to nightmare remembered, still possible, but no longer inevitable, no longer the lens through which every crisis was interpreted. New anxieties replaced the old ones, new technologies brought new fears, and the sky that once threatened mushroom clouds now threatens climate change, asteroid impacts, solar flares, the gradual warming that melts ice and raises seas, the slow catastrophe that unfolds over decades rather than seconds. But the film remains, frozen in its moment but somehow timeless, its images still potent, its warnings still relevant, its story still resonating. Because the fear it addresses is not really about Martians or atomic weapons, but about something deeper, about vulnerability, about how quickly everything can change, about the fragility of civilization and the persistence of chaos. Film is memory. Celluloid is memory. each frame preserving a moment that occurred decades ago. Light that passed through a camera lens on a soundstage somewhere in Los Angeles. Light that bounced off painted sets and costumed actors in miniature spaceships. Light that was captured by chemical emulsion and fixed into permanence, becoming a record that outlasts the people who created it, that survives the moment it depicts, that continues to transmit its message across time like a radio signal bouncing through space, weakening but never quite disappearing, always findable by someone searching for it. When we watch the War of the Worlds now, we are looking at light from 1953, photons that were frozen then and are released now, and there is something magical about this, something that collapses time, that makes the past present, that lets the dead speak to the living through the medium of projected images and recorded sound. The actors in the film are gone now, most of them, Gene Barry and Anne Robinson and Les Tremayne, their performances preserved long after their bodies return to dust. And when we watch them move across the screen, we are watching ghosts, echoes, traces of people who existed but exist no longer, except in this crystallized form, this amber that holds not insects but humans. Not millions of years of history but mere decades, though decades are long enough for everything to change. The projectionist who loaded the reels in 1953 could not have known that his actions were part of a chain of transmission that would extend across generations, that the light he enabled would continue to reach eyes he would never see, that the story he helped tell would be retold and reinterpreted endlessly, that the film would outlive not just its creators but the entire context that created it, would survive into a world where space travel is routine, where we have sent probes to every planet, where robots crawl across Mars and orbit Saturn, where telescopes peer into the deep past of the universe, seeing light from galaxies billions of years old, where the cosmos is no longer mysterious, but merely incompletely understood, mapped but not mastered, explored but not exhausted. The film exists in this new world as an artifact, a message from the past, a time capsule that preserves not just a story but an entire atmosphere of thought, a way of imagining the future that tells us more about 1953 than about any possible invasion, that shows us how people lived with fear, how they processed anxiety, how they created meaning in a moment when meaning seemed fragile and contested. And then, on January 8th, 2025, telescopes in Hawaii detected something. The Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, known as ATLAS, consists of 4 telescopes distributed across the Hawaiian Islands and South Africa, automated observatories that scan the sky every night, searching for objects that might pose a threat to Earth, asteroids whose orbits might intersect our own, comets that might fragment and send debris our way, any rock or ice that might, through the blind mechanics of celestial motion, find itself on a collision course with our planet. The system became fully operational in 2018, and since then, it has discovered thousands of asteroids, cataloged their orbits, calculated their trajectories, determined which ones represent danger, and which ones will pass harmlessly by, adding to the growing database of near-Earth objects that orbit the Sun in our vicinity, that share our neighborhood in space, that remind us constantly that we live in a shooting gallery, that impacts are not ancient history but ongoing possibility. Atlas is named appropriately, the titan who held the sky on his shoulders, who bore the weight of the heavens, and the system continues this work, watching the sky, warning of danger, standing guard between humanity and the chaos of space. The detection on January 8th was unusual from the first moment. The object was moving too fast, its velocity far exceeding what solar system dynamics would predict for a bound object, for something captured by the Sun's gravity and locked into repeating orbit. Preliminary calculations showed an orbital eccentricity greater than 1, meaning the trajectory was hyperbolic rather than elliptical, meaning the object was not circling but passing through, visiting our solar system briefly before departing forever, meaning it had come from somewhere else, from the vast spaces between stars, from the galaxy beyond our local neighborhood. This was immediately recognized as significant because objects from interstellar space are rare, vanishingly rare, so rare that humanity had only detected 2 before this moment. had only confirmed that things from other star systems occasionally wandered through our own, blown by radiation pressure or ejected by planetary interactions or sent by mechanisms we do not fully understand. Voyagers from distant origins, carrying information about conditions elsewhere, about what exists in the space between the lights. The first interstellar object detected was 1I, Oumuamua, discovered on October 19, 2017, by the Pan-STARRS telescope on Haleakala, Hawaii, the same island chain that would later host Atlas. Oumuamua, a Hawaiian word meaning scout, or messenger from afar arriving first, was bizarre from the start, an elongated object tumbling through space, reflecting light in ways that suggested an unusual shape, perhaps cigar-like, perhaps pancake-flat, something unlike any asteroid or comet previously observed. It accelerated as it moved away from the sun in ways that cometary outgassing could not fully explain, leading to speculation about its nature, about whether it might be artificial, whether it might be a probe from another civilization, whether humanity had been visited without knowing it. These speculations were eventually deemed unlikely, most scientists concluding that Oumuamua was probably a natural object with unusual composition or structure, but the mystery was never fully resolved. The object departing the solar system, before telescopes could study it in detail, before missions could be launched to intercept it, before humanity could answer the questions it raised. It receded into the darkness beyond Neptune, beyond the Kuiper Belt, beyond our ability to track it, gone as suddenly as it arrived, leaving behind only observations and theories, and the knowledge that we were not alone in receiving visitors from the stars. The second interstellar object was 2I, Borisov, discovered on August 30, 2019, by amateur astronomer Gennady Borisov using a telescope he built himself in Crimea. Borisov was more conventional than Oumuamua. Clearly a comet with a visible coma and tail, outgassing water and carbon monoxide as it approached the sun. Behaving exactly as solar system comets behave, except for its trajectory, which marked it as an outsider, as something born in orbit around another star, ejected somehow and sent wandering, captured briefly by our sun's gravity, well before slingshotting back out into the void. Borisov allowed for more detailed study than Oumuamua had, multiple telescopes and instruments examining its composition, its structure, its behavior, and what they found was mostly familiar: water, ice, and dust, and organic compounds similar to comets formed in our own system, suggesting that comet formation is a universal process, that the materials and mechanisms that created the Kuiper Belt and Oort cloud operate similarly around other stars, that the building blocks of solar systems are consistent across at least our local region of the galaxy. Borisov taught humanity that interstellar objects could be understood with existing science, that they were not necessarily mysterious, that they fell within known categories and obeyed known laws, that the universe was large, but not fundamentally alien, that the physics that applied here applied everywhere. And then came 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object, detected on that January night when the sky was clear, and the telescopes were scanning their assigned regions, and the automated software flagged an anomaly. A point of light moving too quickly, following a trajectory that indicated origin beyond the solar system. The initial observations were cautious, astronomers understanding that preliminary data can mislead, that orbital calculations require multiple observations across sufficient time baseline to achieve accuracy, that what seems hyperbolic might prove elliptical when more information is gathered. But as more telescopes turned toward the object, as observatories in Chile and Australia and Arizona added their data to the growing collection, as the orbit was refined and recalculated and confirmed, it became clear that this was indeed another visitor, another piece of the galaxy passing through our neighborhood, another messenger from the spaces between stars. But 3I Atlas was stranger than Borisov, more puzzling than Oumuamua, exhibiting behaviors that did not fit neatly into established categories. Its brightness fluctuated in irregular patterns, brightening and dimming on timescales ranging from hours to days, variations that suggested either a highly irregular shape tumbling chaotically or changes in surface reflectivity, or both. Radar observations, when they became possible as the object passed closer to Earth, showed unusual absorption properties, the radio waves bouncing back with less intensity than expected, as if the surface was somehow soft or diffuse or composed of materials that scattered rather than reflected. Spectroscopic analysis revealed ambiguous results, hints of water ice consistent with a cometary origin but also features that might indicate silicates or metals or complex organic compounds. The data subject to multiple interpretations, each expert seeing different patterns in the same numbers, each model fitting some observations while failing to account for others. The object's size was estimated through various methods, comparing its brightness to assumptions about albedo, using radar delay to measure distance and extent, and the results suggested something between 100 and 300 meters across. Large enough to be significant, but small enough that details remained uncertain, that observations from Earth could not resolve fine structure, could only measure average properties, could only guess at shape and composition from indirect evidence. Its velocity relative to the Sun was approximately 70 kilometers per second, fast enough to confirm interstellar origin, to demonstrate that it was not bound to our star, but merely visiting, passing through on a trajectory that would carry it back out into the Milky Way, back into the spaces between solar systems, back into the darkness from which it came. Astronomers calculated that it had likely been traveling for millions of years before entering our solar system, drifting through space at speeds that seemed fast by human standards, but were glacially slow by cosmic measures, moving perhaps from a star dozens or hundreds of light-years away, ejected by planetary formation or stellar evolution or gravitational interactions, set adrift and continuing until gravity brought it here, to this place, to this moment, to these eyes and instruments, watching it pass. The naming followed established protocols, the 3I designating it as the third interstellar object, the Atlas crediting the survey that discovered it, and astronomers and space enthusiasts immediately began referring to it simply as Atlas. Though this created confusion with the survey system itself, the name serving double duty, referring both to the network of telescopes and to the object they found, a linguistic compression that felt appropriate somehow. The finder and the found sharing an identity, united by the moment of discovery, bound together by the act of seeing and being seen. News of the detection spread through scientific communities. First, papers posted to preprint servers, emails circulated among colleagues, plans made for follow-up observations, telescope time requested and granted, instruments prepared for what might be a unique opportunity to study something from beyond our stellar neighborhood. The general public learned more slowly, as press releases were issued, as science journalists wrote explanatory articles, as images were published showing a faint dot moving against background stars. Unremarkable visually but profound in implication. A pixel representing an object that had traveled light years to be here, that carried information about elsewhere, that reminded humanity of the vastness beyond our immediate experience. And as astronomers gathered data and the public learned the news, and debates began about what Atlas was and where it came from and what it might tell us about interstellar space, someone, somewhere, remembered a film from 1953. It might have been an astronomer with a taste for classic cinema, someone who grew up watching old science fiction movies and never lost their affection for the practical effects and earnest performances, who recognized the connections between fictional speculation and actual discovery, who saw patterns across the decades. It might have been a film scholar who followed space news, who tracked how science fiction predicted or failed to predict actual scientific developments, who maintained lists of prophecies and coincidences, of times when imagination accidentally aligned with reality. It might have been a casual observer, someone browsing social media who saw the Atlas announcement and felt a tickle of recognition, a sense that they had seen this before, that the scenario was familiar, that somewhere in the archive of their memory was a match, and who pursued that feeling until they found its source. In a 1953 Paramount production about Martian invasion and microbial salvation, whoever made the connection first, however it happened, the observation spread, the comparison was noted, the parallel was drawn between the film and the discovery, between the fictional probe and the actual object, between the imagination of the Cold War and the reality of the 21st century. The connection was not immediately obvious, required some interpretive work, some willingness to see patterns that might be coincidence. The War of the Worlds was about invasion, about weapons, about intentional malice. while 3I Atlas was just a rock or ice or whatever it was, an object without agency or purpose, following Newtonian mechanics through space without awareness or intention. The Martian machines in the film descended deliberately on Earth, choosing their target, executing their plan, whereas Atlas had no plan, was not choosing, was simply moving according to gravity and momentum, its trajectory determined by conditions established millions of years ago, by events that occurred before humanity existed. The film imagined threats, while the discovery revealed only curiosity, only another piece of the cosmos to study and catalog. No danger, no invasion, nothing but the usual work of astronomy applied to an unusual object. But beneath the surface differences, deeper parallels emerged. Both the film and the detection involved something from elsewhere, arriving in our space, entering our awareness, demanding interpretation. Both raised questions about what exists beyond our immediate environment, about what might be out there in the dark, about how we would recognize the unfamiliar, about what tools and concepts we would use to understand something that originated in completely different conditions. Both triggered an observatory response. The film showing scientists gathering around the crashed machines, trying to understand what they were seeing. The actual event showing astronomers gathering data around the world, pointing telescopes at this visitor, trying to understand what they were seeing. Both involved invisible forces. The film's bacteria working beneath perception to defeat the invaders. The actual object's composition and structure remaining uncertain despite observation, hiding its nature behind the limits of telescopic resolution and spectroscopic ambiguity. Both ultimately suggested that the cosmos was more complex than previously understood, that our solar system was not isolated but connected to the larger galaxy, that things could arrive unexpectedly, that we lived in a universe of traffic and flow rather than stable isolation. The timing added another layer to the connection, the sense that something significant was happening in this particular moment of 2025, that the universe was delivering a message, if only we could read it correctly. Humanity had reached a strange inflection point, poised between capabilities and crises, able to detect objects in deep space, but unable to prevent climate change, able to sequence genomes but unable to distribute vaccines equitably, able to build artificial intelligence but unable to control its implications, simultaneously powerful and helpless, knowledgeable and ignorant, advancing and declining. The discovery of Atlas came amid ongoing debates about planetary defense, about how humanity would respond to an actual impact threat, about whether our technologies were sufficient to deflect an asteroid or comet on collision course with Earth, about whether we could save ourselves if the universe sent danger our way. The object itself posed no threat, its trajectory passing nowhere near Earth, but its existence reminded everyone that impacts were possible, that the solar system contained countless objects whose orbits occasionally intersected with ours, that extinction events were not ancient history but recurring possibility, that we lived on a target in a shooting gallery, protected only by the vastness of space and the improbability of intersection. The film had imagined protection through biology, through invisible organisms that operated beyond human control, that saved humanity without humanity's participation, that rendered technological responses unnecessary, because nature had already provided the solution. This ending had frustrated some viewers over the decades, felt like Deus ex machina, like a cop-out that denied human agency, that suggested we were helpless in the face of cosmic threat, that our fate was determined by forces we could neither see nor influence. But the ending also contained a different message, a suggestion that we were already protected, that the universe had arranged conditions such that life could persist, that the same evolutionary processes that created us had created defenses against threats we didn't know existed, that we were not alone but embedded in systems of mutual support and interdependence, that survival was collaborative rather than individual, that we persisted not because of our strength, but because we existed within networks that sustained us. This was an ecological message, deeply relevant to 2025, to a moment when climate change and biodiversity loss threatened the systems that supported civilization, when scientists warned that disrupting microbial ecosystems could have cascading consequences, that the invisible world of bacteria and fungi and viruses was not peripheral but central to survival. that we ignored it at our peril. Atlas, as it moved through the solar system under constant observation, became a kind of Rorschach test, a blank screen onto which people projected their anxieties and hopes and interpretations. Some saw it as a harbinger, a warning that humanity needed to take planetary defense seriously, that we were vulnerable to cosmic events beyond our control, that we should invest in detection systems and deflection technologies, that we should treat space as a threat environment requiring constant vigilance. Others saw it as an opportunity, a chance to study pristine material from another stellar system, to analyze composition and structure that might reveal information about star formation and planetary development elsewhere in the galaxy, to add data points to our understanding of how solar systems work. Still others saw it as essentially meaningless, just another rock following ballistic trajectory. Interesting but not significant, worth studying but not worth the speculation and extrapolation that surrounded it. Not deserving the attention it received. But for those who remembered the 1953 film, or who learned about it through the connection others drew, Atlas became something more, became part of a story that stretched across decades, became evidence of a strange pattern where fiction and reality intersected, where imagination anticipated discovery, where a movie made in an era of atomic anxiety somehow predicted an event in an era of climate anxiety, where the mechanisms were different but the structure was the same. Arrival from elsewhere, uncertainty about nature and intention, ultimate resolution through invisible forces. This narrative appealed to something deep in human cognition, the pattern recognition systems that had evolved to find meaning in chaos, that looked for connections between events, that constructed stories to explain coincidences, that treated the universe as intelligible rather than random, that believed that if two things seemed related, they probably were related, that correlation implied causation, that synchronicity revealed hidden order. Film theorists and cultural critics had long noted that science fiction often functioned as social prophecy, not because writers and filmmakers could literally predict the future, but because they articulated anxieties and possibilities that were already present in their moment, already implicit in technological trajectories and social dynamics, already visible to anyone paying attention. The best science fiction extrapolated from existing conditions rather than inventing from whole cloth, took current trends and extended them, asked, what if this continues? Or what if this accelerates? Or what if this combines with that? And sometimes, these extrapolations aligned with actual developments, not through precognition, but through analysis, through understanding the forces shaping the present and imagining where they might lead. The War of the Worlds, both Wells' novel and Haskins' film, succeeded as prophecy, not because they predicted interstellar objects, but because they understood something essential about human relationship with the cosmos, about how we projected our fears onto the sky, about how every age reimagined threats in terms that made sense to them, about how the unknown would always be populated with monsters until proven otherwise. Wells had written during the height of British imperialism, when Europeans were colonizing Africa and Asia and the Pacific, treating other cultures as resources to exploit or obstacles to remove, deploying superior technology to subjugate less industrialized societies, and his Martian invasion was Britain's colonialism reflected back, letting British readers experience what it felt like to be on the receiving end, to be the primitives facing superior force, to be the colonized rather than the colonizers. Haskins' film, made during the early Cold War, transformed this into a story about nuclear anxiety, about American fears of Soviet attack, about cities destroyed and civilization threatened, about whether technology could save or only destroy, about whether science was humanity's hope or its doom. And now, in 2025, as Atlas moved through the solar system, the story was being reimagined again, transformed into a meditation on cosmic vulnerability, on planetary fragility, on how small we were against the scale of the universe, on how dependent we were on conditions we did not control and could not modify, on how the invisible world of microorganisms and the invisible reaches of interstellar space were both beyond our perception, but not beyond their influence on our existence. The film's images had outlived their original context, had been absorbed into collective memory and cultural vocabulary, becoming reference points that later generations could recognize even without seeing the film itself. The cobra-headed Martian machines floating through the streets of Los Angeles, glowing with malevolent luminescence, had become iconic, had appeared in countless homages and parodies, had been reproduced in toys and models and video games, had entered the visual language through which people imagined alien technology. The heat ray effects, the buildings dissolving into dust, the masses fleeing in panic, the mushroom clouds rising over distant hills, all of these had become shorthand for apocalypse. Visual metaphors that communicated instantly, that bypassed rational analysis and spoke directly to emotion, to primal fears of destruction and death. When people saw images of Atlas, even though they were seeing only a pixel moving across a field of stars, even though the object posed no threat and exhibited no intention, some part of their brain retrieved these archetypal images from the film, superimposed them onto the reality, felt an echo of that old fear, wondered if maybe this time the visitor might be hostile, if maybe this time the threat was real. This was not rational, was not based on evidence, was not supported by any observation or calculation. But rationality is not the only mode of human cognition, is perhaps not even the primary mode. We are storytelling creatures, narrative engines, meaning-making machines that constantly construct explanations for what we observe, that link events into sequences, that impose patterns on randomness, that see faces in clouds and hear voices in wind and detect intention in coincidence. This cognitive style has served us well evolutionarily, has allowed us to predict behavior and avoid danger and cooperate in groups, has made us the dominant species on the planet despite our physical weakness, despite our lack of natural weapons or armor. But it also makes us see connections that don't exist, makes us find meaning where there is only noise, makes us treat correlation as causation, and synchronicity as significance, makes us believe that a 1953 film predicted a 2025 discovery, when actually the connection exists only in interpretation, only in the way we choose to frame both events. Yet dismissing the connection as mere apophenia, as simple pattern recognition gone awry, misses something important about how human culture works, about how ideas propagate across time, about how stories shape perception, and perception shapes reality. The fact that someone saw a parallel between the film and the discovery, the fact that this parallel was shared and discussed and elaborated, the fact that it spread through social networks and appeared in articles and videos and conversations, means that the connection exists culturally even if it doesn't exist physically, means that the film and the object are now linked in the network of associations that constitutes meaning, means that future discussions of either one will invoke the other, means that the 1953 movie has become part of how we understand the 2025 discovery. Culture operates through these linkages, through metaphors and analogies and references, through the accumulated weight of prior interpretations shaping current understanding, through the lens of previous stories, filtering new experiences. The 1953 audience who watched The War of the Worlds could not have imagined Atlas, could not have conceived of automated telescope networks scanning the sky for threats, could not have pictured computers calculating orbital trajectories, could not have envisioned the technologies that would make the detection possible. They lived in a world where computer still meant a person who did calculations by hand, where space travel existed only in fiction, where the cosmos was known only through optical telescopes and theoretical physics, where Mars was still potentially inhabited, where Venus might harbor jungles beneath its clouds, where the solar system was mysterious and largely unexplored. They could imagine invasion because the sky was unknown, because planets could plausibly hide civilizations, because the spaces between worlds might conceal armadas waiting to strike. The film's prologue, showing the Martian perspective as they surveyed the solar system looking for a suitable target, worked because audiences had no direct knowledge to contradict it. No photographs from space to reveal the barren reality, no orbital missions to prove that Mars was dead and Venus was hell, and the outer planets were gas and ice with no surface to stand on. The 2025 audience watching images of Atlas knows far more about the solar system than their 1953 counterparts could have imagined, has seen photographs of every planet, has watched rovers trundle across Martian soil, has observed geysers erupting from Saturn's moon Enceladus, has measured the composition of Jupiter's atmosphere, has mapped the Kuiper Belt, and catalogued thousands of asteroids. The mystery has been dispelled, replaced with knowledge, and the knowledge has revealed a solar system that is fascinating but not threatening, diverse but not dangerous, full of interesting geology and chemistry but empty of intelligence, devoid of civilizations or invasions or anything that might deliberately harm us. The threats that remain are impersonal, mindless, mechanical, asteroids following orbital mechanics, comets perturbed by gravity, the blind forces of celestial motion, occasionally producing intersections that could prove catastrophic if they involved Earth. We are vulnerable not to malice but to coincidence, not to weapons but to rocks, not to invasion but to impact. But knowing this, understanding the mechanical nature of cosmic threats, does not eliminate anxiety, does not make people feel safe, does not provide the comfort that knowledge is supposed to deliver. If anything, the anxiety has increased, has spread beyond the specific fear of nuclear war that dominated the 1,950 seconds to encompass a broader existential unease about humanity's place in the universe, about whether we matter, about whether the cosmos notices us or cares about our existence, about whether we are significant or merely fortunate, protected not by providence but by probability, by the statistical improbability of intersection, by the sheer size of space making collisions rare even though they remain possible. The universe revealed by modern astronomy is vast and indifferent, governed by laws that apply regardless of their consequences for life, utterly unconcerned with human hopes or fears or survival. This understanding, this cosmic loneliness, this realization that we are not the center of anything but merely occupants of an unremarkable planet orbiting an unremarkable star in an unremarkable galaxy, has produced what some philosophers call the crisis of meaning, the difficulty of maintaining purpose and value in a universe that seems to deny both. The 1953 film offered an answer to this crisis, though not one that would satisfy most modern viewers. The film's ending explicitly invoked God, presented microbial salvation as divine intervention, suggested that humanity was protected by supernatural forces that arranged the universe for our benefit. Sir Cedric Hardwicke's narration in the final moments thanked Providence for the bacteria that defeated the Martians, treated their existence as evidence of cosmic design, as proof that life on Earth was meant to survive, that we were watched over and cared for by powers beyond our comprehension. This was Cold War religiosity, the civic faith that blended Christianity with American exceptionalism, that treated the United States as divinely favored, that understood the conflict with the Soviet Union as a battle between good and evil, freedom and tyranny, God and atheism. The film's religious themes resonated with audiences who attended church regularly, who prayed in schools, who saw no contradiction between science and faith, who believed that religious values and scientific progress could coexist harmoniously. But 2025 is not 1953, and the cultural consensus about religion has fragmented, has given way to pluralism and secularism, and dozens of competing worldviews, none dominant, all negotiating for space and influence. Many people still hold religious beliefs, still find meaning and purpose through faith, still interpret cosmic events as divine messages, but they no longer represent the mainstream assumption, no longer provide the default framework through which science fiction or science fact is interpreted. The mechanistic universe, revealed by astronomy and physics, has displaced the designed universe of theology for many people, leaving them without the comfort that the 1953 film offered, without the assurance that something watches over us, without the conviction that survival is anything more than luck and adaptation. This produces a different kind of anxiety, harder to alleviate because there is no prayer that addresses it, no ritual that resolves it, no faith that transforms cosmic indifference into cosmic care. Atlas, moving through this interpretive landscape, becomes whatever observers need it to be. For some, it remains what it objectively is, an interstellar object, probably an asteroid or comet fragment, providing valuable scientific data about conditions in other stellar systems. Interesting, but not meaningful, beyond its contribution to astronomical knowledge. For others, it becomes a reminder of vulnerability, evidence that space is not empty, that things from elsewhere can enter our vicinity, that our solar system is not isolated, but part of a larger galactic neighborhood, where objects flow and mix according to dynamics we incompletely understand. For still others, it becomes symbolic, a projection screen for anxieties about the future, about whether humanity will survive the coming decades, about whether we can solve the problems we've created, about whether the invisible forces that saved us in the film might save us again in reality, whether the microbes that defeated the Martians might somehow address climate change or pandemic disease, or the various other crises that threaten civilization. The microbe motif deserves deeper examination because it connects the 1953 film to the 2025 discovery in ways that go beyond superficial similarity. Both involve invisible forces, things too small or too distant to perceive directly, known only through their effects, through inference and interpretation rather than direct observation. The bacteria in the film cannot be seen with the naked eye, require microscopes to observe, work their destruction of the Martians through biochemical processes that occur at molecular scale, attacking cellular structures and metabolic pathways, overwhelming the alien physiology with their sheer abundance and diversity. The Martians, coming from a world presumably sterilized or at least very different in its microbial ecology, have no immunity, no defenses, no way to resist the invisible assault, and they die quickly once exposed, their superior technology useless against enemies they cannot see or fight. Atlas similarly operates mostly beyond direct perception. When astronomers observe it, they are not seeing the object itself, but light reflected from its surface, photons that traveled from the sun to the object and back to Earth, carrying information encoded in their wavelength and intensity and polarization, information that must be decoded and interpreted using complex instruments and sophisticated analysis. The object's composition remains uncertain, hidden behind the limits of telescopic resolution, inferred from spectroscopic signatures that might indicate multiple possible materials, that might be contaminated by noise or artifacts, that might be misinterpreted due to assumptions built into the analysis software. Even its size is uncertain, estimated rather than measured, dependent on guesses about albedo and shape that might be wrong. The object exists beyond the threshold of direct knowledge, in the realm of inference and interpretation, where data points must be connected into theories, where observations must be reconciled with physical models, where certainty is impossible and probability is the best we can achieve. This epistemological parallel, this similarity in how we know about both the microbes and the object, reflects a deeper truth about human understanding of the universe. Most of what we know indirectly, through instruments and calculations, through proxies and models, through chains of inference that connect observations to conclusions. We cannot see atoms directly, cannot observe genes with our eyes, cannot perceive electromagnetic radiation outside the narrow visible spectrum, cannot directly experience most of the phenomena that science describes. We rely on instruments to extend our senses, on mathematics to organize our observations, on theories to connect cause and effect, on communities of researchers to check and verify and replicate findings. Knowledge is collective and mediated, built up over time through the contributions of thousands of people, each adding pieces to a puzzle that no individual can see completely, each working in partial ignorance and partial understanding, each trusting that the overall enterprise converges on truth, even if any particular piece might be wrong. The 1953 film worked because it tapped into anxieties that were immediate and visceral, fears that needed no explanation because everyone felt them, lived with them, breathed them in with every news broadcast and newspaper headline. Nuclear war was not abstract, was not hypothetical, was specific and imminent and imaginable, something that could happen tomorrow, something that required no suspension of disbelief to consider. When audiences watched Los Angeles burn on screen, they were watching what might happen to their own cities, what could happen at any moment if diplomatic tensions escalated, or military judgments failed, or accidents occurred. The film let them experience this fear in controlled conditions, let them survive it fictionally, let them walk out of the theater into a world that had not ended, not yet, not today. And this experience provided catharsis, released tension, made the real danger slightly more bearable because it had been rehearsed in imagination. The 2025 world watching Atlas lacks this immediate visceral fear, this specific threat that everyone agrees on and understands. Our anxieties are more diffuse, more chronic, more multiple. We worry about climate change, but it unfolds over decades rather than seconds, lacks the dramatic immediacy of nuclear exchange. We worry about artificial intelligence, but the threat is speculative, uncertain, dependent on developments that might or might not occur. We worry about pandemics, having just lived through one, but the next one has not arrived yet, remains potential rather than actual. We worry about political instability, about economic inequality, about biodiversity loss, about ocean acidification, about countless threats that are real and serious, but that do not produce the acute terror of mushroom clouds blooming over cities, do not concentrate all anxiety into a single nightmare scenario. This dispersion of fear makes it harder to address, harder to organize around, harder to transform into productive action, because there is no single enemy to unite against, no clear solution that would solve everything, no way to win, and know that you've won. Atlas, in this context, offers a kind of relief, provides a focal point for anxiety, something specific and observable, and bounded. An interstellar object is manageable as a concept, fits within existing frameworks of understanding, poses no immediate threat, requires no moral judgment or political action, simply exists as a fact to be studied and understood. People can worry about it, can speculate about it, can imagine it as dangerous even though it isn't, and this displaced anxiety serves a function, provides an outlet, lets people feel concerned about something clear and simple, instead of the multiple complex overlapping crises that characterize the current moment. The object becomes a screen for projection, a repository for fears that cannot be named or addressed directly, and the parallel with the 1953 film reinforces this by providing a narrative structure, a story that people already know how to tell, a set of archetypes and plot points that organize experience into comprehensible form. But beneath the psychological function, beneath the cultural interpretation, beneath the narrative connections and symbolic meanings, there remains the scientific reality of what Atlas is and what its detection means. The object exists, moves through space according to physical laws, carries information about its origin and composition encoded in light and radio waves, provides data that can be analyzed and understood using established methods. Astronomers around the world are observing it, gathering measurements, refining calculations, preparing papers for publication, adding to the body of knowledge about interstellar objects and their properties. The speculation and storytelling happening in popular discourse is separate from this scientific work, operates in parallel, neither invalidating nor enhancing the research, simply coexisting as a different mode of engaging with the same phenomenon. The scientific investigation of Atlas follows systematic protocols, uses calibrated instruments, applies peer review and replication, distinguishes between observation and interpretation, quantifies uncertainty, acknowledges limitations. Papers will be published, describing its orbital elements with error bars, its spectroscopic signatures with signal-to-noise ratios, its morphology with confidence intervals. These papers will be technical and precise, written in the formal language of professional astronomy, accessible mainly to specialists who understand the jargon and methods, who can evaluate the quality of the data and the soundness of the conclusions. They will be archived permanently, becoming part of the scientific record, available for future researchers to consult and cite, contributing to humanity's expanding catalog of knowledge about the cosmos. But parallel to this scientific discourse, another conversation unfolds, less formal, more creative, more willing to speculate and imagine, and draw connections that might not be rigorously supported by evidence. This is the public discourse about Atlas, the articles and videos and social media posts that explain the discovery to general audiences, that contextualize it within broader cultural narratives, that ask questions like, what if, and could it be? And does this mean that engage with the detection not just as data, but as story, as event with meaning beyond its physical properties? This discourse is where the connection to the 1953 film lives, where the parallel between fiction and reality is noted and elaborated, where people work out what the discovery means to them personally, emotionally, philosophically. Neither discourse is superior to the other. Neither is the correct way to engage with Atlas. Science and storytelling serve different functions, answer different questions, satisfy different needs. Science tells us what the object is, where it came from, where it's going, what it's made of, how it compares to other objects we've observed. Storytelling tells us what the object means, how it makes us feel, what it reveals about ourselves, how it connects to other parts of our experience. Both are valid, both are valuable, both contribute to the full human response to the universe we inhabit. The 1953 film exists at the intersection of these discourses, being simultaneously a work of fiction and an artifact of scientific imagination. Entertainment that reflects actual astronomical knowledge of its era, while also speculating wildly beyond that knowledge, creating images and scenarios that have no basis in observation but that feel true to the anxieties and possibilities of the moment. The film's Martians, with their biomechanical war machines and their vulnerability to Earth bacteria, are completely invented, have no connection to reality, are pure imagination, yet they work as metaphors, as expressions of themes and ideas that resonate across decades. The film does not predict Atlas in any literal sense, cannot be said to have anticipated the discovery, did not contain information about interstellar objects that would only be confirmed decades later. But it did something perhaps more interesting. It created a template for thinking about cosmic visitors, a narrative structure for processing the unfamiliar, a set of images and ideas that would be available when the actual discovery occurred, ready to be activated and applied. This is how culture works. Accumulating stories and images and concepts over time, building up a repertoire of templates and frameworks that can be deployed when needed, when reality produces something that requires interpretation. When Atlas was detected, people reached for available frameworks to make sense of it, and for some people, the framework they found was the War of the Worlds, because the film had lodged itself in cultural memory, had become part of the shared vocabulary through which cosmic events could be discussed. The film provided a language for talking about visitors from elsewhere, a set of associations between the extraterrestrial and the threatening, between the unknown and the dangerous, between the cosmos and the catastrophe. These associations are not necessarily accurate, do not reflect what we actually know about interstellar objects, but they are available, they are ready to hand, they are culturally embedded, and so they get used. The question of prophecy, of whether fiction can predict the future, is complicated and perhaps unanswerable in any definitive way. Certainly there are cases where science fiction imagined technologies or social developments before they occurred, where writers speculated about possibilities that later became realities. Jules Verne imagined submarines and moon rockets. H.G. Wells imagined tanks and atomic weapons. Arthur C. Clarke imagined communication satellites, and these technologies were eventually built, sometimes explicitly inspired by the fictional visions. But were these true predictions, or simply extrapolations from existing trends? Were the writers seeing the future, or were they seeing the present carefully enough to understand where it was heading? Were they prophets or merely observant? The case of the War of the Worlds and Atlas is even more ambiguous because the film did not actually predict the detection of interstellar objects, did not anticipate the technology that would make such detection possible, did not describe anything like what Atlas actually is. The connection exists only at the level of metaphor, only through interpretive linking, only because someone chose to see a parallel between Martian invasion and interstellar visitor, between alien technology and space rock, between the film's imagery and the detection's reality. This is not prophecy in any traditional sense, is not even prediction, is closer to coincidence that has been narrativized, to random alignment that has been treated as meaningful because it serves psychological and cultural needs. Yet dismissing the connection entirely, treating it as mere coincidence without significance, misses the deeper truth about how human consciousness relates to time and causality in meaning. We do not experience time as a simple linear flow from past to present to future. We experience it as a complex web of memory and anticipation, of past events that continue to shape present perception, of future possibilities that influence current choices, of ideas and images that persist across decades, waiting to be reactivated and reinterpreted. The 1953 film created images that lived on in memory, that became part of how generations of people imagined cosmic threat. And when Atlas was detected in 2025, those images were still available, still active, still shaping how people understood the new information. In this sense, the film does reach across time, does influence how the future interprets events, does participate in creating the meaning that the discovery holds. Even if it did not literally predict what would happen, prophecy might be better understood not as supernatural knowledge of future events, but as deep pattern recognition, as sensitivity to structures that repeat across different contexts, as ability to see forms that transcend specific content. The 1953 film recognized a pattern. Things from elsewhere arrive, produce crisis, ultimately are resolved by forces beyond human control. This pattern is not unique to Martian invasion. It applies to pandemic disease, to economic collapse, to ecological disaster, to any situation where external forces overwhelm human systems and solutions must be found beyond the usual toolkit. Atlas fits this pattern loosely, is another instance of something from elsewhere arriving, though without the crisis and resolution that the pattern usually includes. But the arrival itself is enough to activate the pattern recognition, to make people reach for the story template, to wonder if this time things might proceed further, might move beyond mere detection to something more consequential. The pattern also involves invisible forces, things too small or too distant or too subtle to perceive directly, but that nonetheless exert influence, that shape outcomes, that determine survival. In the film, the invisible force is bacteria, microorganisms that defeat the Martians through biochemical warfare waged at cellular scale. In reality, the invisible forces are more numerous. The gravitational fields that shaped Atlas's trajectory, the radiation pressure that may have affected its motion, the quantum processes that govern how light interacts with its surface, the statistical mechanics that determine which photons reach our telescopes and which are scattered into space. We cannot see these forces directly. We can only infer them from their effects. But they are real. They operate constantly. They determine what happens whether we observe them or not. Both the film and the reality acknowledge that the visible world is not all that exists, that what we cannot see is not unimportant, that the invisible realm may be more significant than the visible one. That understanding requires looking beyond surface appearances to underlying mechanisms. This epistemological theme, this recognition that reality extends beyond perception, that instruments and inference are necessary to grasp what exists, is perhaps the deepest connection between the 1953 film and the 2025 discovery. Both force us to acknowledge the limits of direct experience, the necessity of mediated knowledge, the dependence on tools and theories that extend our understanding beyond what evolution equipped us to perceive. The bacteria in the film require microscopes to observe, require germ theory to understand, require a scientific framework that did not exist for most of human history, that was developed only through centuries of careful observation and experimentation. Atlas requires telescopes to detect, requires orbital mechanics to interpret, requires a cosmological framework that was developed only through centuries of astronomical observation and mathematical physics. Both remind us that truth is not obvious, that reality does not present itself directly, that knowledge is an achievement requiring effort and infrastructure and collective wisdom. The film's audiences in 1953 were learning to trust this kind of mediated knowledge, were being asked to believe in things they could not see, to accept that scientists understood reality better than common sense did, to grant authority to experts who studied phenomena beyond ordinary experience. This was the era when atomic physics revealed a world beneath the visible, when quantum mechanics described particles that behaved like waves, when cosmology proposed an expanding universe that had begun in a singularity, when scientific claims became increasingly abstract and counterintuitive, requiring faith in instruments and mathematics rather than confirmation from direct experience. The film participated in this educational project, teaching audiences to accept that the most important aspects of reality might be invisible, that salvation might come from forces beyond perception, that trusting scientific authority was not just reasonable, but necessary. The 2025 audience has inherited this trust, but also has seen it betrayed and restored multiple times across decades of scientific controversy and technological development. We have learned to trust vaccines, but have also learned that pharmaceutical companies sometimes prioritize profit over safety. We have learned to trust climate scientists, but have also learned that predictions are uncertain and subject to revision. We have learned to trust technology, but have also learned that systems fail, algorithms discriminate, innovations produce unintended consequences. Our relationship with scientific authority is more complex than the 1953 relationship, more nuanced, more willing to question and verify, less accepting of claims simply because they come from experts. This is partly progress, a healthy skepticism that demands evidence and accountability. But it also makes it harder to mobilize around scientific consensus, harder to take collective action based on expert recommendations, harder to maintain the shared epistemological framework that democracy and civilization require. Atlas enters this contested epistemological landscape as another data point in an ongoing negotiation about what we know and how we know it and whom we should trust. The detection is not controversial. The observations are solid. The orbit calculations are reliable. Multiple independent groups have confirmed the findings. The evidence is as good as astronomy typically provides. But the interpretation remains open. The significance remains debatable. The meaning remains subject to multiple readings. And this is where the cultural work happens, where storytelling and science intersect, where the 1953 film becomes relevant again. The film offers one interpretation of what cosmic visitors mean, one story about how humanity should respond, one vision of what salvation looks like. And even though that interpretation is fictional, even though the story is imaginary, even though the vision reflects the concerns of a different era, it still resonates, still provides a framework that some people find useful, still shapes how the discovery is understood and discussed. The film's imagery has permeated culture so thoroughly that it appears in contexts far removed from the original, has become reference and homage, has been sampled and remixed, has passed through so many iterations that its origin is sometimes forgotten. The floating Martian machines appear in video games and comic books. The heat ray effects are recreated in other films and television shows. The scenes of destruction have been quoted by disaster movies for decades. This dispersion and repetition has transformed the film from a specific artifact of 1953 into a more general template, a pattern that exists independently of its source that can be activated whenever something from the film is encountered or mentioned. When Atlas was detected and someone noted the parallel with the War of the Worlds, this activation occurred, the template was retrieved from cultural memory, the pattern was recognized, and suddenly the film was relevant again, was being discussed and watched and written about, was participating in the 2025 conversation despite being made 72 years earlier. This persistence across time, this ability to remain relevant despite changing contexts, is one measure of art's success, of whether a work transcends its moment to speak to multiple generations. Not all films age well. Not all stories continue to resonate. Not all images retain their power across decades. Many works are locked into their era, comprehensible only with historical context, meaningless to audiences who do not share the original concerns and references. But some works contain something universal, some structure or insight or emotional truth that translates across time, that remains accessible even when the specific details have become dated. The War of the Worlds has achieved this persistence, has remained watchable and meaningful, despite its 1,950 seconds aesthetics and Cold War anxieties. has continued to find audiences who connect with its themes, even if they do not share its context. Part of this persistence comes from the film's visual power, from the fact that the effects remain striking even after decades of technological advancement, that the floating machines still look alien and threatening, that the destruction still feels visceral and real, that the sense of scale and danger still communicates effectively. But part also comes from the thematic depth, from the film's engagement with questions that remain relevant. How should we respond to the unknown? What does it mean to be vulnerable? Where does salvation come from? These questions do not age, do not become less pressing, do not stop being worth asking even when the specific threats change. Even when Martians are replaced by asteroids or pandemics or climate change or whatever dangers preoccupy the current moment. The film provides one set of answers, suggests that we survive through forces beyond our control, through luck and biology and cosmic arrangement. But it also acknowledges the questions themselves, validates the anxiety, recognizes that being alive means being vulnerable, that existence is precarious, that we live always on the edge of annihilation, saved not by virtue but by circumstances that might change at any moment. The cosmos revealed by modern astronomy is not actively hostile, but it is not safe either. It is simply indifferent, governed by physical laws that operate without regard for their consequences, that produce both the conditions for life and the mechanisms of extinction, that create habitable planets and also hurl asteroids at them, that forge heavy elements in stellar furnaces and then scatter them through supernova explosions, that make everything possible and also make everything temporary. In this cosmos, survival is not guaranteed, is not deserved, is simply what happens when conditions align favorably and nothing too destructive occurs. We exist in a window of opportunity, a brief period when Earth's environment is suitable, when no major asteroid has struck, when no nearby supernova has sterilized our planet, when the sun burns steadily and the magnetic field deflects solar wind, and the atmosphere retains breathable composition. This window has persisted for billions of years, allowing life to emerge and evolve and diversify, and eventually produce consciousness capable of understanding the window's existence and contemplating its inevitable closure. But the window will close, eventually, either through astronomical events or solar evolution or human action, and everything we are, everything we have built, everything we have learned and created and loved will be erased, will return to the undifferentiated matter and energy from which it temporarily emerged. This cosmic perspective can be paralyzing, can make everything seem meaningless, can strip away the significance we typically attribute to our actions and relationships and achievements. If everything ends, if nothing persists, if the universe will eventually reach heat death, and all complexity will dissolve into maximum entropy, then what does anything matter? Why care about anything when the ultimate fate is oblivion? This is the nihilistic conclusion that cosmic awareness can produce. The sense that human concerns are trivial against the scale of space and time, that our lives are less than dust, less than sparks, less than anything that could be considered significant. But the 1953 film, and perhaps also the 2025 detection of Atlas, suggests an alternative response, a way of finding meaning not despite cosmic scale, but within it. The film's bacteria save humanity not through nobility or intelligence, but simply by existing, by being what they are, by participating in the web of life that has no purpose but that nonetheless functions, that produces effects, that shapes outcomes. The bacteria do not know they are saving humanity, do not intend to defeat the Martians, simply exist and reproduce and compete, and thereby accomplish something that all human technology could not accomplish. This is a different kind of heroism, an accidental heroism, a heroism of existence rather than action, and it suggests that meaning comes not from grand intentions, but from participation, from being part of the universe's unfolding, from existing within the web of causation and consequence that links everything. Atlas similarly exists, similarly moves through space without intention or awareness, simply following the trajectory that gravitational interactions established millions of years ago, carrying information about its origin without knowing or caring that it carries this information, passing through our solar system and being observed without understanding that observation, participating in our story without choosing to participate. The object has no agency, no purpose, no awareness that it has become significant to the small conscious entities on the third planet who detect it and analyze it and write about it and wonder what it means. It is simply what it is, a piece of rock or ice or whatever it's made from, moving through space according to physical law, existing without meaning beyond its existence. And yet we find it meaningful. We detect significance in its arrival. We connect it to our stories and anxieties and attempts to understand our place in the cosmos. The meaning is not in the object, but in our response to the object, in what we choose to see and think and feel when we encounter it. This is true for all of astronomy, all of cosmology, all of human attempts to understand the universe. The stars do not care that we observe them, do not know that we have catalogued them and measured them and theorized about them and written poems about them. They simply burn, fusing hydrogen into helium, converting mass into energy according to Einstein's equations, shining their light into space without regard for whether anyone receives it. But we receive it. We point our telescopes skyward and collect photons that have traveled light years to reach us, and we analyze those photons and extract information and construct models and add to our understanding. And this is meaningful to us, even if it means nothing to the stars. The universe may be indifferent, but we are not indifferent to the universe. We care about it, we study it, we try to understand it, and this caring creates meaning, even if the meaning is not reciprocated, even if we are shouting into a void that does not answer. The 1953 film captures this one-sided relationship, this human tendency to project intention and meaning onto forces that have neither. The Martians in the film are presented as intentional invaders, beings with plans and motives and agency, but the bacteria that defeat them have none of these things. They simply exist and reproduce according to biological imperatives, mindless yet effective, purposeless yet consequential. The film anthropomorphizes the Martians, but not the bacteria, treats the aliens as subjects, but the microbes as objects, as forces rather than actors, as mechanisms rather than agents. And yet, the bacteria win. The mindless defeat, the minded, the purposeless overcome, the purposeful. And the lesson is that consciousness is not required for significance, that things without minds can still shape outcomes, that the universe is full of forces that operate without awareness, but that nonetheless determine what happens. Atlas is one of these forces, one of these mindless shapers of reality. And so, in a sense, it is more like the bacteria than like the Martians, more like the invisible saviors than like the visible threats. It has no intention toward us, no awareness of us, no relationship to us, except the arbitrary one of passing through the region of space we occupy. It might have missed our solar system entirely if gravitational perturbations billions of years ago had differed slightly, might have taken a different path that would never bring it close enough for our telescopes to detect. Its presence here is contingent, accidental, a product of chaotic dynamics that operated long before our solar system formed, before our planet cooled, before life began. And yet it is here, and we are here, and we observe it. And through this observation we connect across gulfs of space and time. We establish a relationship even though the relationship is entirely one-sided. We create meaning even though the object cannot reciprocate. This capacity to create meaning, to find significance in arrangements of matter and energy, to tell stories about photons and trajectories, to connect fictional Martians with actual asteroids, to draw parallels across decades and contexts, this is perhaps humanity's most distinctive feature, the thing that makes us unlike anything else we have encountered in the universe. We are meaning-making machines, pattern recognition engines, storytelling consciousnesses embedded in flesh, and living in a cosmos that seems designed to be incomprehensible, to exceed our capacity for understanding, to present us with scales and complexities that our evolved cognition cannot grasp. And yet we try anyway. We persist in attempting to understand. We build instruments and develop theories and conduct experiments and publish papers and create films and write essays and have conversations, and slowly, incrementally, partially, we increase our understanding. We expand our comprehension. We make progress toward knowing the universe that contains us. The 1953 film was part of this project, part of humanity's attempt to understand its place in the cosmos, by imagining possibilities, by speculating about threats, by processing anxieties through fiction, by creating stories that organized experience and made existence comprehensible. The film did not predict Atlas, did not contain secret knowledge about the future, did not literally prophesy anything. But it participated in the ongoing human conversation with the universe, added its voice to the chorus of attempts to understand what it means to be conscious matter in an unconscious cosmos, what it means to be a small intelligence in an indifferent expanse, what it means to survive, not through strength, but through accident and arrangement, and the operations of forces beyond control or comprehension. And now, Atlas has joined that conversation, has become part of the story we tell about ourselves and our world and our cosmic context. The object will pass through the solar system and depart. We'll move beyond the range of our telescopes and back into the darkness from which it came. And we will watch it go. We'll track it as long as we can. We'll extract every bit of information available before it becomes too faint to observe. And then it will be gone. We'll continue its journey through the galaxy. We'll travel for millions more years through interstellar space, silent and unaware, while we remain here on our planet. Watching the sky, wondering what else might visit, telling stories about what we've seen, adding Atlas to our catalog of cosmic encounters, connecting it to everything that came before and everything that might come after. The film will remain as well, will continue to exist as long as there are ways to watch it, as long as the data is preserved and the technology exists to decode it and project it or display it. The celluloid may decay, the original prints may be lost, but digital copies will persist, will be maintained and migrated across storage systems, will remain accessible to future audiences, who will watch a 1953 film and see something that speaks to them, that resonates with their own moment, that provides frameworks for understanding their own anxieties and hopes. The film will outlive everyone who worked on it, everyone who saw it in its first release, everyone who connected it to Atlas, will continue into a future we cannot imagine, carrying its message forward, its images flickering across screens yet to be invented, its story adapting to new contexts, remaining forever, 1953, but also forever relevant. Frozen in time, but also timeless. This is the achievement of art, of stories, of human creativity generally, to create things that persist beyond their creators, that carry meaning across time, that connect generations who never meet, that allow the past to speak to the future and the future to reinterpret the past, that create a conversation across decades and centuries, a continuity of consciousness despite the mortality of individuals, a culture that transcends biology by encoding itself in external media, in films and books and songs and buildings, in all the ways that humans externalize thought and preserve it for later retrieval. We cannot escape death individually, cannot achieve immortality in flesh, but we can participate in something larger, can add our voices to the ongoing human project, can create works that outlast us, can contribute to the accumulating wisdom and beauty and understanding that each generation inherits and modifies and passes forward. The War of the Worlds has done this, has passed from 1953 to 2025 and beyond, has carried its warnings and insights and images across 7 decades of change, has remained watchable and meaningful, and capable of provoking thought and discussion. Atlas has become part of this transmission, has been incorporated into the film's ongoing life, has given it new relevance, has sparked renewed interest in a story that might otherwise be fading into archive and memory. The detection has reactivated the film, has made it significant again, has drawn attention back to its themes and imagery, has created a moment where past and present align, where fiction and reality echo each other, where the patterns that connect become visible to anyone willing to look. Perhaps this is what prophecy really is. Not supernatural knowledge of future events, but the creation of patterns that future events can fit into. The establishment of frameworks that later experiences can activate and inhabit. The planting of seeds that grow when conditions ripen. The film created a pattern in 1953, embedded it in cultural memory, And 72 years later, Atlas arrived and the pattern was recognized, was retrieved and applied, was used to organize understanding of the new detection. The film did not cause the detection, did not influence the object's trajectory, had no causal relationship to the event. But it provided a way of thinking about the event, a lens through which to view it, a story that made the detection comprehensible and interesting and connected to human concerns. This is a different kind of causation, cultural rather than physical, operating through memory and association rather than through forces and particles. But it is real nonetheless. It has effects. It shapes how people respond to astronomical discoveries. It influences what gets noticed and discussed and remembered. The cosmos does not care about our stories, does not notice our films, does not arrange itself according to our narratives. The universe operates according to physical law, following equations that contain no terms for meaning or purpose or intention, that describe how matter and energy behave regardless of whether anyone observes or interprets or understands. Atlas moves through space following its trajectory because that is what physics requires, because gravitation and momentum combine to produce motion, because the universe is deterministic at scales larger than quantum uncertainty, because the past constrains the present, which constrains the future in an unbroken chain of causation. The object cannot deviate from its path any more than water can flow uphill, any more than entropy can decrease in closed systems, any more than time can reverse. It goes where physics sends it, indifferent to observation, unaffected by interpretation. But we who observe are not indifferent, are deeply affected by interpretation, do care about stories and meanings and connections. We live in the physical universe, but also in a symbolic universe, a realm of language and culture and narrative where causation works differently, where ideas influence behavior, where stories shape perception, where meaning determines value. This symbolic universe is not separate from the physical universe, but emerges from it, is produced by conscious beings who are themselves physical systems, brains following their own physics and chemistry but producing subjective experience, mental content, the sense of being someone rather than something, the perspective from inside a body looking out at a world. This emergence of mind from matter, of meaning from mechanism, of subjective experience from objective process, remains one of the deepest mysteries, one of the hardest problems in philosophy and neuroscience. But it is undeniably real. We experience it directly. We live it constantly. We cannot doubt that consciousness exists, even if we cannot explain how it exists. And consciousness changes everything, creates a universe that contains observers, that can be known by something within it, that can be described and theorized and wondered about. Without consciousness, the universe would still exist, matter would still follow physical law, stars would still burn, planets would still orbit, asteroids would still move through space, but none of it would mean anything because there would be no one to experience meaning, no perspective from which significance could be assessed, no mind to care whether anything happened or not. Consciousness makes the universe matter, makes it important, makes it worth understanding, creates the possibility that existence can be experienced and evaluated and appreciated rather than simply occurring without witness. This is perhaps the deepest significance of both the film and the detection. The fact that they exist within a consciousness space, that they are known and thought about, that they provoke response and interpretation, that they participate in the ongoing human attempt to understand and relate to the cosmos. The film is a product of consciousness, imagination applied to anxiety, creativity, transforming fear into story, human minds collaborating to create something that did not exist before, that would not exist without intention and effort and artistic vision. The detection is also a product of consciousness, observation applied to raw data, perception recognizing patterns in streams of photons, human minds collaborating to build telescopes and develop software and calculate orbits and publish findings. Both are achievements, accomplishments that required intelligence and patience and skill, that succeeded because conscious beings decided to create and observe, to tell stories and discover facts, to participate actively in the universe, rather than simply being passively part of it. The film asks, implicitly, what would happen if the universe sent danger our way? If cosmic threat arrived, and human technology proved insufficient. If we faced annihilation and had to hope for salvation from beyond ourselves, the answer the film provides is that we would be saved by forces we don't control, by biology and chemistry operating at scales beneath perception, by arrangements that preceded our existence and that continue regardless of our awareness. This answer is simultaneously comforting and disturbing, reassuring in its suggestion that we are protected but unsettling in its denial of agency, in its implication that our fate is determined by factors beyond our influence. We want to believe that we control our destiny, that our choices matter, that intelligence and technology and effort can solve problems, can protect us from threats, can ensure survival. The film undercuts this belief, suggests that the most important protection might be accidental, might be something we had nothing to do with establishing, might be microbes rather than missiles. Atlas echoes this theme because it too is beyond our control, is a force we cannot influence, an object whose trajectory is already determined, whose presence in our solar system is a done deal that we can only observe, not alter. If it were on collision course with Earth, if its orbit threatened impact, we would have to respond, would have to deploy whatever technology we possessed to deflect it or destroy it or mitigate the damage, would have to become active rather than passive, agents rather than observers. But it is not threatening, poses no danger, requires no response beyond observation and analysis. And so we can watch it pass with curiosity rather than fear, can treat it as interesting rather than terrifying, can appreciate it as information rather than threat. This is fortunate, is a good outcome, is what we hope for whenever interstellar objects are detected. But it also means that the question the film poses remains hypothetical, remains unanswered by actual experience, remains something we can only imagine and prepare for rather than something we have lived through and learned from. Planetary defense is now an active field of research and development, with missions like DART demonstrating that asteroids can be deflected by kinetic impactors, with surveys like Atlas scanning the sky for potential threats, with international coordination establishing protocols for response should a genuine danger be detected. Humanity is not helpless, is not entirely dependent on accidental protection, has developed capabilities that might actually work if tested by real emergency. But these capabilities remain largely untested, remain theoretical until proven in actual application, and there is uncertainty about whether they would be sufficient against a large asteroid or a comet with high velocity, or an object detected too late for intervention to be possible. We have improved our odds, have moved from complete vulnerability to partial preparedness, but we have not eliminated the threat, have not made Earth invulnerable, have not achieved the safety that would allow us to stop worrying about impacts. This limited control, this partial capability, this uncertainty about whether our preparations would prove adequate. This is the condition of existence generally, the state we always occupy regardless of context. We can influence outcomes but cannot determine them, can increase probability of success but cannot guarantee it, can prepare and plan and work and hope but cannot eliminate risk, cannot make anything perfectly safe, cannot control all variables. Life is always uncertain, always provisional, always dependent on factors beyond our management, and this is not a bug but a feature, not a failure of human capability, but a consequence of living in a complex universe, where causes are multiple and consequences are unpredictable, and the future is always somewhat opaque. We like to tell ourselves stories of control, like to believe that knowledge is power and that power is sufficient, like to imagine that we can master circumstances and eliminate threat, and create security through intelligence and technology. But the universe keeps reminding us that control is limited, that knowledge is incomplete, that power has boundaries, that security is impossible because existence is fundamentally risky, fundamentally uncertain, fundamentally beyond complete comprehension or management. The 1953 film was created during a moment of acute awareness of this lack of control, when atomic weapons had demonstrated humanity's power to destroy, but also humanity's inability to ensure that destruction would not occur, when the fate of civilization seemed to hang on decisions made by politicians and generals who might miscalculate or act rashly or simply fail to prevent what everyone feared. The film channeled this anxiety into alien invasion, externalized the threat, displaced it onto fictional Martians, but the underlying concern was the same. We are vulnerable. We cannot guarantee our survival. Forces beyond our control might end us at any moment. The film's ending, with its microbial salvation, acknowledged this vulnerability while also suggesting that protection might exist anyway, might come from unexpected sources, might be built into the structure of existence in ways we don't understand or anticipate. The 2025 context involves different specific threats, but the same underlying condition, the same basic vulnerability, the same recognition that we cannot guarantee our survival no matter how sophisticated our technology becomes. Climate change, pandemic disease, nuclear weapons, asteroid impacts, artificial intelligence, ecological collapse. These are the current versions of the anxiety that the 1953 film addressed, different in details, but similar in structure, all reminding us that we are mortal, not just individually, but collectively, that civilization can end, that everything we have built can be destroyed, that consciousness on Earth is contingent rather than necessary, is a temporary arrangement that might cease at any time. Atlas participates in this reminder simply by existing, by being something from elsewhere, passing through, by demonstrating that space is not empty, that the universe is active and dynamic and full of objects moving according to forces that don't care about Earth or life or consciousness. But Atlas also demonstrates something else, demonstrates humanity's growing capability to observe and understand, to detect objects that would have been completely invisible to previous generations, to calculate trajectories and determine origins and analyze compositions, to add to our knowledge of the cosmos through systematic observation and careful analysis. The detection represents success, represents the functioning of systems designed to watch the sky and warn of danger, represents the application of scientific method to practical problems. We saw the object. We tracked it. We determined that it posed no threat. We studied it. We learned from it. And this is exactly what we should be doing. This is the appropriate response to cosmic uncertainty, to continue improving our observational capabilities, to continue developing our understanding, to continue building the infrastructure that makes us less ignorant, less vulnerable, less surprised by what the universe sends our way. The film could not have imagined Atlas, the survey system, could not have anticipated automated telescopes scanning the sky every night, computer algorithms detecting anomalies in data streams, international networks sharing information in real time, humanity collectively watching for threats and ready to respond if necessary. This infrastructure did not exist in 1953, could not exist given the technology of that era, was not even conceptually possible in a world before satellites and computers and digital imaging and internet communication. The film imagined humanity as vulnerable and passive, watching the sky anxiously for alien invasion, unable to prevent attack, saved only by biological accident. The reality of 2025 is more complex. We remain vulnerable but are no longer passive, remain mortal but are not helpless, have developed capabilities that give us some influence over our fate, even if not complete control. This is progress, is genuine improvement, is a reason for optimism, despite the many valid reasons for pessimism. We are learning, we are adapting, we are building systems and accumulating knowledge, and increasing our chances of survival. We are not guaranteed to survive. No amount of knowledge or capability can eliminate all risk, but we have moved the odds in our favor, have made catastrophe less likely, have given ourselves better chances than previous generations possessed. This is worth acknowledging, worth celebrating even, worth recognizing as achievement rather than taking for granted or dismissing as insufficient. The fact that we detected Atlas at all, that we calculated its orbit and analyzed its spectrum and determined its interstellar origin, that we added it to our catalog of cosmic knowledge, this demonstrates capability that would have been miraculous to the 1953 audience. This shows how far we've come in 7 decades of scientific and technological development. Yet the film remains relevant, continues to speak to contemporary anxieties, continues to provide frameworks for thinking about cosmic threats and human vulnerability. It has not been made obsolete by progress, has not been superseded by actual capability, continues to offer something that pure science cannot provide: a story, a narrative structure, an emotional resonance, a way of processing fear that acknowledges it rather than dismissing it, that validates anxiety rather than pretending it's irrational. The film says, yes, you're right to be afraid. The universe is dangerous. Threats are real. Annihilation is possible. You are not crazy or paranoid to worry about this. But the film also says, and yet we persist. Somehow we survive. Salvation comes from unexpected sources. The universe contains protection as well as threat. You are not alone in your fear, and you might be saved despite your fear. This message, this emotional validation combined with hope, this acknowledgement of danger combined with possibility of survival, this is what makes the film continue to matter, continue to be watched and discussed, and connected to contemporary events like the detection of Atlas. The connection between the film and the detection is, in the end, a connection made by consciousness, by minds that recognize patterns and create meanings, and tell stories that link past to present to possible futures. The connection does not exist in the physical world, does not involve any causal chain from film to object, exists only in the symbolic realm where ideas live and propagate, and influence how people think and feel. But this realm is real, is consequential, shapes how humanity responds to circumstances, how we interpret discoveries, how we decide what matters and what we should do about it. The film influences how some people understand Atlas, provides context and associations and emotional tones that shape perception, adds layers of meaning that pure astronomy cannot provide. And this influence, this cultural work, this meaning-making, is valuable, is part of how we process, experience, and maintain coherence, and create the shared narratives that allow civilization to function. We need both, need the precise observations and careful calculations of science, and need the stories and metaphors and emotional content of art, need facts and need meanings, need to know what things are, and need to understand what they mean, need data and need narrative. The detection of Atlas provides data, adds to our catalog of observations, increases our understanding of interstellar objects and their properties. The connection to the War of the Worlds provides narrative, adds to our cultural conversation, increases our understanding of how humans respond to cosmic discoveries and what anxieties and hopes we project onto them. Neither is complete without the other. Neither is sufficient by itself. Both are necessary parts of the full human response to the universe we inhabit. The film will be linked to Atlas in certain contexts, in certain conversations, in certain articles and videos and discussions, and this link will become part of the permanent record, will be preserved in archives and databases and search engines, will be available for future researchers studying how the detection was received and interpreted and understood by contemporary audiences. The link will seem strange to some of those future researchers, will seem like a stretch, like a forced connection between unrelated things, like the kind of pattern recognition that borders on apophenia. But other researchers will understand, will recognize that the connection reveals something important about human psychology, about cultural memory, about how stories persist and adapt and continue to shape perception across generations. Both interpretations will be valid. Both will capture something true, because the connection is both arbitrary and meaningful, both coincidental and significant, both in our heads and in the world. The stars do not predict, they remember, and sometimes they remember through us. This phrase, or something like it, might close a documentary about Atlas and the 1953 film, might serve as the final thought that leaves audiences contemplating the strange relationship between past and present, between fiction and reality, between human imagination and cosmic occurrence. The phrase suggests that time works differently than we usually think, that causation flows not just forward from past to future, but also backward from future to past, that events reach across decades through the medium of consciousness, that nothing is ever truly over because memory preserves everything, transforms it, makes it available for reactivation and reinterpretation whenever circumstances align. The stars remember in the sense that they carry information about the past encoded in their light, in the elements they've synthesized, in the planetary systems they've created, in the objects they've ejected that wander through space, carrying evidence of their origin. Atlas remembers its origin, carries information about the stellar system where it formed, about the conditions that prevailed billions of years ago, about the processes that created it and eventually sent it wandering. We who observe it are attempting to read this memory, to decode the information, to reconstruct the past from indirect evidence. And in doing so, we become part of the remembering, become the consciousness through which the universe recalls its own history. The film also remembers, preserves a moment from 1953, captures the anxieties and aesthetics and attitudes of that era, makes them available for future examination and experience.